Today's episode is brought to you by Growing for Market magazine. For 31 years, Growing for Market magazine has been the source of practical ideas and information for direct market vegetable and flower growers. All articles are written by farmers who get their hands dirty and know what they're doing. If you do farmers markets, CSA, farm stand, pick your own, florist sales, or wholesaling, whether you're a commercial grower or want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market for the nitty-gritty details of growing, marketing, and the business of small farming. Available as paper magazine and a digital download with thousands of archived articles available. Use the coupon code WORM, that's WORM, to get 25% off any subscription at growingformarket.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by RIMOL Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. RIMOL Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit RIMOLGreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a RIMOL tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. All right, let's jam. Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, Episode 18, Season 4, in trying to cover some topics that have been largely overlooked in the podcast over the years, but are still highly relevant to market gardens. I reached out to my buddy Blake Cothron of Peaceful Heritage Nursery in Stanford, Kentucky, to talk primarily about small-scale fruit production in the market garden. So Blake has written a couple books of relevance on the subject, including Pawpaws, the complete growing and marketing guide, as well as his forthcoming book, The Berry Grower, Small-Scale Organic Fruit Production in the 21st Century, which comes out early this summer, but is on pre-order now, notably. We'll link both of those in the show notes, but Blake and I talk about fruit production and focus especially on raspberries, pawpaws, blueberries, muscadines, and figs. But we also discuss a little about fertility management of perennial fruits like foliar sprays. We talk generally about the organic nursery business and the enormous market for it. But first, did you know that a single episode of shows like Radiolab, for instance, or any of those well-produced NPR podcasts can cost $250,000 or more per episode? That per episode cost is nearly double our entire yearly budget. In other words, compared to other podcasts, your dollars go extraordinarily far with us. For the price of one of their shows, we do dozens of podcasts, including Winter Growers and Collaborative Farming podcasts, and a couple other new ones coming up soon. Be on the lookout for that. We do dozens of videos per year, and we keep it all open and free to the public. So if you enjoy that work, you get something out of it, and it helps you on your farm. Even giving a small amount goes a profoundly long way. So consider supporting us on patreon.com/no-till-growers. There are discounts on merch and the Living Soil Handbook, for instance, and events when we get back to all that. But at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, even $2 to $5 per month, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Zachary Nordland, Ojai Roots, Scott Snodgrass, Lucas Brindle, Jacob Arthur, and Yannick LaPlante. Big thanks to everyone who supports our show in whatever way that you can. Buying a copy of the Living Soil Handbook specifically from no-tillgrowers.com is a great way to do it. You can always simply Venmo us a few bucks to @no-tillgrowers just to say thanks. There are lots of young farmers out there who may not be able to swing a few bucks every month. Think of them. We appreciate all the support and will continue to crank out awesome stuff for you like this amazing episode with Blake Cothron of Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Blake Cothron, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jesse. It's great to be sharing this space with you today.
And great to have you on. So let's kick it off where we always do. Give us an idea of where you're located and what kind of acreage you're working on and those sorts of things.
Sure. So we are in central Kentucky, right in the Bluegrass region. We're about an hour south of Lexington and in an area called Stanford. That's the nearest small town. I co-own and co-operate Peaceful Heritage Nursery, which is a certified organic nursery here in Stanford. And we are a specialty fruit nursery primarily mail order type nursery. We actually do very little local business. There's just not a whole lot of interest in our area. So we mostly do mail order, and we're shipping out fruit trees and plants and seeds and cuttings of resilient fruits and other useful plants all over the country. And we do a little bit of international shipment too of seeds, mostly pawpaw seeds. We don't ship trees internationally, but we do seeds and occasionally cuttings. And so we're on about 4.5 acres. About 3 acres of that is in production, mostly in mixed orchard and berry plantings, and roughly around an acre in nursery production, including outdoor no-till beds and greenhouses growing containerized stock and misting systems for propagation and everything like that.
Yeah, that's great. So it's interesting. Like you mentioned that you were certified organic nursery. I don't feel like I see that very often. Am I wrong in that perception, or is it not very common to see certified organic, nursery stock?
Oh, it's a niche that is so wide open. It's unbelievable. There are very few certified organic nurseries in the United States right now. I don't know the exact numbers, but I would guess less than 100, probably less than 50, maybe less than 25. Like there's very, very few and far in between. We're actually the only fruit tree nursery in Kentucky that propagates our own plants and sells them. There, a few years ago, there were 3. Now there's 1, and we're the only one. And I believe we're the only certified organic nursery. I think maybe there's one other certified organic nursery in Kentucky, actually, that does native plants. So as you can see, I mean, it's a wide open niche that is just waiting for enterprising and strategic and innovative growers to step right into and just take off.
Yeah, describe that market a little bit, because you said you weren't selling maybe a lot locally, but I know that we've known each other for a while, and I visit your site regularly, and I see how quickly you sell out of stuff. Do you feel like you're anywhere near to meeting the market?
No. I mean, it's the market is so big, you wouldn't believe it. And I've heard stories from other growers that, people in areas that are a little more progressive in terms of wanting organic products, like certain parts of Texas or California, for instance, I've heard stories of people coming to them and just saying, I want everything organic from start to finish. Like, I want to buy an organic landscaping tree, and I want it to be an organic seed and organic soil and organic, everything. And the people, the nursery owners just said, like, that doesn't even exist. Like, that just, you can't find that. Because the market is so limited in terms of production, but the demand is 100 times what is out there right now. And so, for instance, you can find you might be able to find a certified organic plant, but that it comes from a certified organic seed from start to finish is extremely rare. And I mean, I'm just barely touching on, the amount of demand that's out there. What we produce and what we sell, I could be doing 10 times as much easy.
Wow. And you mentioned having 3 acres in production. That production is mostly producing plants to resell, or I know you don't sell a lot of fruit, right?
Yeah, I sell very little fruit right now. We've been on our site for 5 years. This is our second site that my family's lived on and turned into a farm from scratch. And we've been on this site for 5 years now, almost to the day. And, as you know, it takes a while for fruits to get into production, especially tree fruits. And the last 2 springs, we had this really terrible weather with these late freezes that damaged a lot of the blossoms on the tree fruits. And so we've had a few setbacks with that, and there's just the time factor of it taking time to produce. So currently I'm not selling a lot of fruit, mostly just berries on a very small scale. I used to do a CSA and a farmer's market with vegetables and actually started introducing some fruits into it. and that was really successful. But as far as right now, I'm just kind of waiting for things to start producing, and then when I have enough, I'll sell it. But really, I'm not a fruit farm. I'm mostly growing the trees and the bushes as trials to see what grows really well and what's really resilient to introduce into the nursery, and for cuttings. So the trees are really mother trees or cuttings factories, and fruit is sort of like a byproduct. As strange as that sounds, I'm not really in the business of selling fruit. I'm in the business of selling cuttings and seeds and fruit trees and plants. And so I see the trees more as a source of cuttings than as a source of fruit to sell. But eventually I probably will have a few truckloads of fruit every year, mostly apples and pears and pawpaws and things. And then I'm sure I'll sell them, but just to move it along so it doesn't rot, more than trying to run a business selling fruit.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's also, something I'm thinking about is like our region. So we're in roughly the same region. I think you're a little bit warmer than I am, just you're south of us. But we don't see a lot of fruit production in this region. I think of like a lot of the fruits coming from out west or up north, like apples and et cetera. What do you think? Is that a product of the climate, like just the humidity and those sorts of things?
There's a few factors there. There used to be a lot more orchards in this area. There was actually a small commercial orchard just maybe 15 minutes from us. And that old man just passed away a few years ago. And I actually visited him in his orchard before he died. And, it was mostly apples. And I think they did some peaches too. And there was another fruit orchard, another 15 or 20 minutes from here. And that got bulldozed over, 4 or 5 years ago, and turned into GMO corn, so there used to be a lot more fruit orchards, everywhere really, for the most part. But in Kentucky, there were 2. But, over the years, I've really found that Kentucky is an exceedingly challenging place to grow fruit. For a lot of reasons, the high humidity, the insect pressure, the late frost, the pretty severely cold winters some years, and ice storms and things. And those problems seem to be getting worse, or instead of calling them problems, you could just call them factors or challenges. But they seem to be getting more challenging and problematic as we have new invasive insects coming in every few years, and the fluctuating spring weather that seems to be getting worse. So it's never been easy. And honestly, there's only about 3 or 4 big commercial nurseries in Kentucky that I can think of, and they're mostly doing U-pick and stocking some local shelves. They're not like exporting fruit to other states or anything like that. So yeah, at this point, 99.5% of our fruit in Kentucky's, being imported from other states, I would say.
Kind of with that in mind, but also just in general, I want, one of the things that you and I were going to talk about today is small fruit production. So I'm hoping that maybe we could just start with you giving a few fruits, especially in the market garden context, like maybe giving a few fruits that you think work well in the market garden context. And then maybe we can talk about production individually.
So when I wrote the book, The Berry Grower, Small Scale Organic Fruit Production in the 21st Century, I was, I'd been wanting to write a book about fruit growing for some years, because I've been growing fruit now for about 20 years. And so I wanted to write a book about growing fruit. And over the last few years, I noticed a really interesting trend. And that was that while we were having this really difficult spring weather, we had a series of winter warm-ups that lasted unusually long amounts of time. And then during March, when it should still be pretty cold in Kentucky overall, it warmed up really fast, and plants started to bud out like a month early. I saw that with mulberry trees, jujube trees, apples, pears, pawpaws, like everything was budding out literally like 4 to 6 weeks earlier than normal than it should be. And I noticed that the small fruits, which is what I refer to as generally fruits that are small or that are produced on small plants. For example, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, as compared to pear trees, apple trees, pawpaw trees, etc. I noticed that they were budding out as well. But after the series of freezes that came, there were 2 major freezes that came after that warm up, after they had budded out. Like actually, the plants were budding out, they were sending out little shoots. It went down to 20 degrees, fried everything, overnight it all melted and turned brown. Then it kind of evened out, the weather evened out. Things started to recover and send out a new series of buds and shoots. Then it froze again to about 28 degrees on our farm, fried everything for the second time. And at that point, some things were dying from the stress. But I noticed that the small fruits just seemed to have no problem at all and went on to produce bumper crops. And some of them were in full bloom when it went down to 27, 28 degrees, and it just didn't affect them at all. And most other tree fruits and things can't handle anything like that. So that was really impressive. And I also started to think about how small fruits are just a lot more suited to the market farm than tree fruits in general. And so that's why the first chapter of the book is why small scale, small fruits. So I just saw that there were a lot of strategic points to small fruits, a lot of quite big advantages to small fruits as compared to tree fruits. Not saying that tree fruits aren't important or good or useful. They definitely are, and they're wonderful. But there's something about the small fruits that I think a lot of growers should kind of tune into the possibilities with this. And I think there's also a huge niche that's open for more local fruit production, like we were just talking. You go into the local health food stores, the local grocery stores, the local co-op in Lexington, and you just don't see any local fruit hardly at all. The local orchard near Lexington brings in some apples. Another grower brings in some pawpaws. That's really about it. So, all those blueberries from Chile and blackberries from California and Mexico. There's no reason why there can't be enterprising growers bringing those in and doing it without too much trouble or land or input.
Yeah, that's great. So, okay, so let's maybe talk about some of these individually. I mean, there's so many places on that list that we could start, but maybe we could start with figs. I feel like, especially because we've kind of been focusing a little bit on this podcast this year into more into the South, I think of the figs as more of a slightly warmer climate crop. But maybe talk to us about that. Maybe start with where figs work and maybe where they don't.
So figs are an awesome crop. They've been grown. There's evidence that they've been grown longer than grains, is what some archaeologists are theorizing. Figs are an incredible crop. And one thing that has led to them being spread all over the world is their adaptability. They have this incredible resilience. They're very adaptable, and to the point to where you can just cut off some branches, when they're dormant, stick them in a bag, ride a horse for 3 weeks to a new area, stick them in the ground, and they'll grow. You can't say that about a lot of other fruits. And so this is how they spread way back when. People were carrying them on ships, people were carrying them on horseback, people were carrying them in caravans and just sticking them in the ground when they got there, and they grew. And so that's created a large genetic base of figs. So they vary quite a lot. And you have to be very careful when you're wanting to grow figs that you're planting figs that are adapted to your area. And so there's ones, for instance, from the Mount Etna region of Italy that are very cold hardy compared to ones that originated in, say, Africa or India. or other places that are quite a bit warmer. So you have a lot of genetic diversity to choose from, but you need to make sure that the ones you're getting are adapted to your region. So where we're at in Kentucky is really not fig country at all. For instance, even if when you plant the cold hardy figs here in Kentucky, unless you plant them in a really warm protected microclimate, generally what you get is a plant that's going to send up lots of green shoots in the spring, potentially make a small crop, very small crop of figs, literally, a few handfuls. And then once winter comes, those branches are going to get killed back to the ground or very close to the ground. And it's going to restart, pretty much from almost a blank slate every year. And so that's problematic. And it doesn't really make figs a sustainable crop to grow outdoors in Kentucky. I have seen in certain microclimates in Kentucky, like for instance, in Louisville, where I grew up, I planted some fig trees at my mom's house in a warm urban microclimate next to a huge brick wall. And they actually don't die back to the ground most years. And they've gotten as tall as the house, which is, pushing, 15, 16 feet tall or something. Wow. However, they still don't make a whole lot of figs in Kentucky for various reasons. Now, that being said, I think they make an amazing crop to grow in an unheated high tunnel. Even in Kentucky, I know there's a buddy of mine in southern Indiana. He's growing them in a high tunnel. He runs a market farm, a very successful market farm. He grows them in a high tunnel, and you have to get the most cold hardy varieties. So some examples of those, I've trialed a number of varieties over the years in Kentucky, and I find that Chicago Hardy is pretty much the best one as far as my trials have gone. Another one which shows some promise is Olympian. And there's another one called Floria, which has done quite well here. Those have pretty much been the best. I'm about to trial a bunch of new, more obscure varieties. And I've talked with another grower in Kentucky. He's having a lot of success with those. There's some out of New York that are quite cold hardy. Like, for instance, there's one called Brooklyn White. There's another one called Dark Salem, Abua George, Black Bethlehem. They have these interesting names. So, but what I'm basically getting at is you have to have really cold hardy figs here to grow in Kentucky, and they have to be in a protected situation, preferably in a high tunnel. Now, that being said, I've noticed a huge difference between outdoor fruit quality and indoor fruit quality. And what I've noticed is that in the high tunnel, the fig fruits get about 2 or 3 times as big and look much better too. And they taste close to as good. I'd say outdoors, they probably get a little bit more intensity to the flavor, but indoors, they're quite good. But they get really big. So they're really marketable fruits. Yeah, they like the environment of the high tunnel because it mimics a little bit more where they come from. Because you think of where do figs come from? They come from dry Mediterranean areas, mostly northern India, the Middle East, etc. So when you plant them in good old Kentucky here, it's really humid, it's really wet, it's rainy, there's bugs everywhere. Figs don't particularly like that. So you have to have really adapted varieties. Another thing with figs that you need to have is you need to have figs that have small eyes. And the eye of the fig is the little hole on the bottom part of the fruit where it hangs down. That's a little hole that kind of faces the ground. And it's where the pollinizers would enter into the fig and pollinate it. And so you don't want it to be open because bugs and things will get inside of it, including ants, spotted winged Drosophila, which is a big issue for anybody that grows fruit. You know what that is. We refer to those as SWD. It's a type of fruit fly. There's also a fig fruit fly. And so I mentioned Olympian earlier, and it's cold hardy and resilient, makes a nice big fruit. but it has quite a big eye. And so I'm probably going to phase that one out because it gets fruit flies inside the big eye. So so including cold hardiness, also having a small eye on the fruit is really important. Having ones that don't take forever to start producing is important. So like Florea, for instance, starts its fruiting season in July, whereas there's other varieties that don't start their fruiting season until September in our region. Now down south, you could push those numbers, those times back probably by a few weeks or a month. But still, you can understand where if you have a fruit that starts producing in July and doesn't stop until it freezes in October, that's a really long season compared to one that starts in September, maybe gets 3, 4, 5 weeks of production, and then it's sapped dormant for the season. So those are all things to consider. And that being said, the situation I found is pretty much the same in Tennessee for growing figs. It's a little warmer in Tennessee, and you got, in microclimates, they can really start to thrive, like let's say Nashville or Knoxville or something, they can really start to thrive. But again, growing them outdoors in a non-microclimate area in Tennessee is pretty much about the same. They're going to get whacked down, most years, maybe every once in a while they don't, but then they do in a year or two. So figs don't really start to thrive outdoors until you're Tennessee South, or along the coast, like say coastal South Carolina, coastal North Carolina, coastal Virginia, so basically it needs to be like zone 8. And then figs really start to thrive and have more potential for growing outdoors as a market crop. But as far as the fruit goes, it's very popular. It's not as popular in Kentucky as it is in other areas where it's more of a cultural thing, mostly because in Kentucky, no one was growing figs, 20, 30 years ago, really, because we didn't have access to cold hardy varieties and we didn't have high tunnels and et cetera. But they're starting to catch on more, I've noticed. And just through, you can go to Whole Foods now in Lexington and buy fresh figs. So people are more exposed to the fruit, and there's a slightly rising demand. But in other areas, there's already a strong demand. And I do know one market grower in South Mississippi along the Gulf area that has been growing figs for 25 years or so, and he sells them to restaurants. And one thing that he noted in that regard is that dark figs are always more in demand than green figs or yellow figs. And so like figs that are purple, figs that are blackish, those always have more demand than ones that are green or yellow or light colored. And Chicago Hardy is a nice, fairly dark fig. It really resembles a black mission fig, and most people probably couldn't even tell the difference. So that's good. But yeah, they have a lot of demand, and the price is high on them too. And I mean, as far as organic growing, very, very easy to grow organically. They don't require any sort of pesticides. Their fertilizer requirements are really small. They're drought tolerant. They're just really resilient. The only thing is they can't take the cold. And if you get a long rainy period, you can have a lot of fruit rot, but they keep on producing new fruit constantly. So unlike, let's say, an apple tree that sets all of its fruit at once, and if something comes along, it can damage the entire crop. Well, figs are a lot different in that they're constantly putting out fruit. So all the fruit on the tree could rot in a 3-day long rainstorm, and then right as soon as it dries up, they're putting out new fruit. So this also makes them, extremely productive. And in areas where you're growing the cold hardy varieties, the production is a small fraction of what you get in a Mediterranean area. I think I was reading that in California, the commercial figs, they put on thousands of pounds of fruit apiece, and here in Kentucky, if you get about 10 or 15 pounds off a bush, I call them bushes because they don't really grow into trees here, you're doing really well. But if you look at the price of the fruit that you can get for it, you can get a lot for figs. So per pint of fresh figs, you can get $5 to $6, and per quart you can get $6 to $8. Maybe even more. If you're in a really happening urban market, you could probably get $10 or $12 a quart. If people were excited about it, especially if you're the only person with figs. So, so obviously, even if the tree gets 15 pounds of fruit, but you're getting 20 something dollars a pound, each one adds up real fast. And they don't need a whole lot of space. Like in our high tunnel situation, I have them planted about 4 feet apart, which is probably a little close. But you can see, they're not taking up that much room, 4 feet, 5 feet apart in a high tunnel. And I say it's an unheated high tunnel because, we're not constantly heating it. Although in extreme cold temperatures, I have a wood stove inside of it. I will fire up the wood stove, and just to keep it from going down into the lower teens. I've noticed they can handle, 20 degrees for cold hardy figs is no problem. 15 degrees, is usually not a problem in the high tunnel. I had it go down to about 12 degrees in the high tunnel last year and had no damage at all. Outdoors, they seem to be less cold hardy in those temperatures, I think in part because of, the wind desiccating them and ice and other things, put more stress on the trees. But as you can see, down to 12 or 15 degrees is quite cold hardy, considering that they're a subtropical plant. So they're cool. They're really fun. They're super beautiful too. They're just fun to grow.
Yeah, I love the plant, and obviously eating figs is such a joy. Hey, you all, just jumping in here real quick to get a word from our show sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil, this Cleveland, Ohio-based company, is producing some of the highest quality soil mixes out there. That's why I included their work in my book and use their products on my farm. This is true. Tilth Soil makes composts and potting mixes approved for use in certified organic operations like my own. Their living compost is made from food waste they haul and compost themselves, and it is the cornerstone of all of their blends. Tilth Soils take regenerative and organic growing to a new level. For more information on their products, including bulk ordering and their nationwide shipping, visit www.tilthsoil.com. All right, back to the show. Well, let's try another one. Let's try another crop if you're good with that.
Sure.
And let's talk about, well, maybe you can choose. What's another one that you feel like is, and it doesn't have to necessarily be focused on the South, but what's another one that you feel like in the market garden context is a good one that gets overlooked?
Yeah. I feel like overall in my research and my experience and observations and doing marketing for years, I feel that the best market grower fruit that is so completely overlooked is red raspberries.
Yeah.
And they have a ton of advantages. They're extremely cold hardy. There's varieties that can grow into zone 3, maybe even a little colder, depending on how you manage them. Now, the funny thing is that they won't grow where it's really hot. So they're kind of the opposite of figs. They prefer it cooler, and south of Tennessee, it starts to become less and less friendly for raspberry growing the further south you get, until eventually in the deep south, you can't really grow red raspberries. There's always somebody that somehow pulls it off in their backyard, but I'm talking like a market scale without, undue effort. They don't really grow in the South. But they thrive in Kentucky, North, Tennessee's probably fine too. And what some of the other advantages are to them is that unlike most other fruits, they produce really fast. Like if you can plant raspberries in the ground, even raspberry roots, not even having any above ground cane, they'll produce fruit in 6 months. Most fruits, even blackberries, you're waiting a year or longer. Most other things you're waiting quite a while, but raspberries will produce in 6 months. They are a very lightweight plant, so they don't need a lot of heavy duty trellising. They do need some support. They do need a very light duty trellis, but they don't need like a big, huge trellis with big, huge posts and anchors. They don't need all that stuff. The plants are really small, and you can pack tons and tons of them in to a very small area. They only need about a foot or so in between plants, or not even, so that you can really pack them in. They're very easy to grow organically, very disease resistant, very insect resistant. The main issues with insects are all these new invasive ones like brown marmorated stink bug, and our native stink bugs like raspberries, and this spotted winged Drosophila likes raspberries a whole lot. And so those are the two main insect issues, but I haven't found them to be a huge issue in my experience, but they are a factor to consider. The plants are super resistant to late frost and late freezes. They're very, very cold hardy. Then they're just easy to grow. And the fruit is extremely popular. Like, you don't have to convince most people that like fruit to buy fresh local raspberries. And if you notice, you go to most farmers markets and you just don't see raspberries. Like, if you see fruit, now I'm not talking West Coast, you guys have it all, but here in the East, you go to a market, you might see in the fall apples, pears, you might see blueberries, might see blackberries, but for some reason, strawberries, but for some reason you very rarely see red raspberries. And you just look at the prices at the grocery store. I mean, $5-6 for a little bitty half pint. And the quality of locally grown fruit just blows anything out of the water that's shipped in. And so they're just easy to harvest. Everything about them is easy, and they're super productive. They just make tons of berries. The picking season is long. Like, there's varieties that'll start producing in August, and they don't stop until the middle or end of October here in Kentucky. Up north, maybe a little shorter of a season, but so they're super productive. There's a wide open niche for them. There's just nothing to not like about them. And I think that they have a huge potential for market growers. And I think they're actually the best fruit for all those reasons I just said. They're the value of the fruit, the productivity, the ease of growth, the rapidness of their production, and the fact that they're very easy to grow organically just make them a winner just waiting to happen.
Speaking of growing them organically, and maybe this also could be, you can tie figs into this too, but what does fertility management look like year to year on something like raspberries? Like, what about soil applications, foliar sprays? Like, are there things that you really have to concentrate on? Are they largely going to take care of themselves?
Yeah, so they require a little bit of pruning. It's really super easy. Basically, the best way to do it is to just take them all down at the end of the year. So basically, at the end of the season, when you're done picking all the berries and they've gotten frosted on a few times, you just mow them all down to the ground, like totally to the ground. And they come back really thick in the spring. If there's any canes that spontaneously die or maybe get a borer or something, there's also redneck borers. Can be a minor issue. I haven't found them to be as big of an issue as on blackberries. They're pretty minor, but if you get like a borer inside one and a cane dies or something, you want to clip that out. So they require a little bit of maintenance, but very, very little in that regard. And as far as fertility goes, they seem to be a fairly heavy feeder. They just put on a lot of growth and production. And so, we like to give them a thick covering of compost every year. And then we'll give them some chicken manure in the spring, maybe about a pound per foot of row of chicken manure, granulated chicken manure. You could also use alfalfa meal, soybean meal, liquid feeds. I try to spray everything with kelp. If I can do that at least once or twice a season, I try to spray everything with kelp extract. I use kelp bit. It comes in like a block of like resin, and it's the way to go. You never want to buy kelp extract pre-liquefied. You're just paying for water, and it's got a much higher carbon footprint when you're shipping all that water around in plastic bottles and stuff. So I buy it in like a big block of resin, and I bought this thing probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I probably haven't even used half of it. So that's what I do. So they are fairly heavy feeders, and I think compost is really good for them. I use like a woodsy compost on them, and and then giving them like a pretty high nitrogen fertilizer in the spring, maybe again in the early summer. Around the time they start to bloom, that'd be a good time to fertilize them again. And then I wouldn't fertilize them any after that.
I mean, you mentioned blueberries as well. Is that, I feel like blueberries are a little bit more complicated because their soil conditions. I'm always thinking of blueberries as something that need a more acidic soil. Like, can you talk about blueberries a little bit and managing them? Because I feel like raspberries don't need something that's maybe even figs. Like, they need kind of a richer soil that's not outside of what you'd be using in your garden anyway. But with blueberries, I think of something like needing a little bit more acidic soil. So, like, can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. That's been my experience, and a lot of other growers' experience too. Like you said, blueberries are pretty challenging to grow unless you're in a region where they just proliferate. So, if you're in a sandy soil, like down south, or in certain parts of New England, like let's say certain parts of New Jersey, Michigan. If you're in a sandy soil, then you're in like blueberry heaven. So very easy to grow. Now where we're at, where you have a clay-based soil, much more challenging to grow blueberries, but not impossible. But you have to amend the soil, and for the most part, most growers say that you really have to put peat moss in the soil to get blueberries to really thrive. Now, there's some that will contend that you can use rotted sawdust or rotted wood chips or something. That's probably possible, but I see a lot of authorities on the matter not really condone that. So mostly people are using peat moss. And I just read yesterday that a 6 cubic foot bag of peat moss can do about 45 plants. So you don't need a ton of peat moss, but you do need to put peat moss in the soil because blueberries originate in well drained but very acidic environments, and so they have very specific requirements as far as pH. The pH has to be acidic. Most growers add some sulfur to the soil before they plant the blueberries, and they may even add sulfur, every year, every few years. So they're higher maintenance. They take a lot longer to get into production. You're looking at 4 to 5 years before you're getting any decent yields, 7 years before you're getting full yields. Still pretty resilient though, not prone to many insects or diseases overall. There's a few challenges and a few things that like to feed on them, but nothing too major. Deer are very drawn to blueberries, and so they have to be very protected from deer. In the wintertime, there are premium browse for deer, and so most growers are finding deer fencing is really the way to go. Very productive. And of course, the fruit is always in demand and just seems to be one of people's favorite fruits. And so, blueberries are a score, but they do take a lot more maintenance and care that most market growers are probably not going to want to dedicate to unless they just really want to take on blueberries as a long-term proposition. And that's what I like about raspberries is that, you put them in the ground and that season they're producing fruit. Not full yields. Full yields take a couple of years, but you're still getting sellable quantities of fruit the very first season. And so you're not really dedicating much. You're not having to alter the soil pH. You're not having to buy a bunch of expensive shrubs and put them in the ground and give them all this space. And you basically can just plant raspberries like you would plant any other vegetable crop. And grow them for a couple of years. If you find you don't like them or don't want to continue with it, they're easy to get rid of, and you can just move on. Whereas blueberries, you really have to dedicate, 5-6 years to see them through. But as far as, a fruit crop, they're super popular, very, very productive, very lucrative. And I find that most people that are doing blueberries, it seems like that's kind of what they do. I've seen them integrated into some U-picks and things also, and the growers seem to be pretty happy with that. But as far as like a small scale market grower, I give them I think I give them like a 3 out of 5 for like an urban market grower, and maybe a little higher for a rural market grower. But yeah, I mean they're a solid crop, but they're probably the most challenging fruit on the entire list to grow.
Mm. One other one that you've mentioned to me before, and maybe you mentioned it today, but is muscadines. I feel like this is a fruit. I love muscadines. Nobody ever really talks about them. Can you talk about muscadine, like what the approach should be or could be there?
Yeah, muscadines are one of my favorite fruits, and I've lamented over the years that they don't grow better in Kentucky. In extreme southern Kentucky, they do grow wild, actually. Where I'm at, they don't, and they're not very survivable where I'm at, again, due to the cold, because muscadines are really a zone 7 plus plant, and they really thrive in like 7B, 8, and higher. But yeah, muscadines are incredible. They're their own species of grape. They originated in the southeast US, and they actually grow naturally all the way up to Delaware and along the coast, because you have that coastal effect. Sometimes seems like it's cheating a little bit, because like we're in Kentucky, we're supposed to be in the South. It's supposed to be like warm here. How are they warmer in Delaware, right? But anyhow, muscadines are native species, so they're really resistant to a lot of diseases and insects that plague other types of grapes. I said I've been growing fruit for 20 years. The first fruit I ever grew was grapes. And I quickly realized that unless you're spraying them every year here in Kentucky, you're going to lose a lot of the crop, sometimes all of it, oftentimes half of it or more, to diseases like black rot and other fungal infections from the humidity and everything, even if you're doing everything else right. On that note, I have, I teach people that just because your soil is healthy and rich and plentiful in microorganisms and nutrition and no-till and everything does not mean that it gives plants magical abilities. So just because you have super soil doesn't mean that the plants are not going to get insects or diseases anymore, especially fruits, because the plant can only express a resistance to something that it has a genetic predisposition for. So if the plant has a genetic predisposition to be resistant to a certain fungal spore, then it's going to express that. If it doesn't have that, it's not going to express that, even if it's in excellent soil and good conditions. So that's sort of a little myth that floats around, that if your soil is really healthy, you'll have no insects or diseases, and that's sometimes true, especially with resistant plants and certain vegetables and things. But with fruit, they're just more prone to things that are problematic due to their nature of what they're producing. Vegetables you think are like really thick in cellulose, and not a lot of things really mess with cellulose as much as they mess with sugar, which is what fruits mostly are. So anyhow, muscadine grapes, though, are very resistant to diseases and insects in general. They're pretty much a no spray crop, and there are some varieties that are more disease resistant than others. I'd highly recommend going for the most disease resistant ones you can get if you're growing them organically. And here in Kentucky, they won't grow outdoors reliably. I have a few outdoors right now. They're like under tarps and row cover on the ground, to try to get them through this winter. I do have some in the unheated high tunnel with the figs, and they do great in an unheated high tunnel. I got about 50 pounds of muscadines off this one Carlos vine last season. So I was really happy about that. It was its first crop it ever put out. And muscadines are very popular at the market in areas where they grow. And I've heard from other growers too that even introduced muscadines into their area basically. And they said once people taste the fruit, they're just wanting to buy it. It's super sweet. Some have higher sugar levels than others, but they're all pretty high in sugar. I guess you could say the downsides are that the skin is fairly thick, and they have seeds. And people have been so conditioned to seedless grapes from the grocery store that having seeds in grapes can be a turnoff to some people. In the South, where muscadines are really popular, people just like muscadines so much they don't care that they have seeds. I think there's actually like a seedless variety or two, floating around out there. I doubt the quality is as good. And the universities are breeding them now to be more like crunchy grocery store grapes. I would say, unfortunately, they're breeding them to have thinner skins and to be more crunchy and less that amazing melting pulpy texture that the muscadine has. But there's a lot of different varieties to choose from. They come in both self-fertile and female. The self-fertile will produce on their own. The female will only produce if there's a self-fertile nearby. So you have to consider that. They all produce fruit, but there's female and self-fertile varieties. They need a pretty stout trellis, and you're looking at about 3 to 4 years before they get into production. So they're another long-term proposition, better suited to the rural grower than the urban grower. But that being said, in areas where they're popular, which is basically all over the South, there's no reason why you couldn't establish 100 feet of muscadines, even on a really small farm, and not just be raking in the cash when you take them to the market in pints and half pint containers. They don't need a lot of maintenance. Like I said, they don't really need sprays. They need pruning once in the summer, once in the winter. It's pretty easy and straightforward. The fruit's easy to harvest, and they're just prolific. I mean, like I said, one vine produced 50 pounds of fruit, and that's not even really like a very high, super high yield. Like they can produce even more than that. So, a great fruit to introduce to a small rural market farm in an area where they're popular. And just another great native plant that should be much more widely grown.
Yeah, the fruit is really cool. It's what I always think of it because I just want to make wine out of it. A good tradition in the area, but the fruit tastes amazing. I mean, wine grapes often taste amazing. The first grape I ever had with seeds was a Chasselas grape, which is really typical in Swiss wines. But it was amazing. It was like one of the best grapes I've ever had, and it was the first grape I ever had. It was in France. First grape I ever had that had seeds, and it was amazing. One thing I thought we should talk about is, and I get a lot of questions about it, is Pawpaws. And I know that you wrote another book, your previous book, on Pawpaws. So maybe you could introduce that book a little bit, but maybe we could talk a little bit about Pawpaws, because I have some questions, but I think a lot of people have questions.
Pawpaws, yeah. So they are very, very popular right now. And our nursery has been built on pawpaw trees and pawpaw products. And we've become somewhat famous for the quality of our trees and our pawpaw products. And I wrote an entire book on them called Pawpaws, The Complete Growing and Marketing Guide, that was published by New Society. And that came out last year, and have sold a lot of copies of the book. And it's gotten some international interest too. I have more and more people from overseas contacting me about seeds and cuttings and things. And we sell those as well through the nursery. And pawpaws, we were just talking about muscadines being a native fruit. Pawpaws are another native fruit, and pretty incredible tree. They're actually distantly related to magnolias, which you can see a lot of the similar characteristics in the leaves and the twigs and the flowers, which is kind of curious. And they come from what's considered a tropical fruit family, and they are one of the only temperate members of this species, Annonacea, that will survive in the temperate regions. And they've gotten a lot of attention lately, and it become a pretty hot item. Very kind of mystique about them, and kind of elusive, because the fruit's only usually ripe for a few weeks out of the season. Now, if you're like a plant geek and you have all these different varieties, you can extend that season for months. But as far as going to a fancy restaurant and there being a Pawpaw chiffon pie, you're only going to be able to get those for a couple of weeks. But yeah, they're a very good fruit for market growers to get into. They produce fairly fast. Again, you're probably looking at 4 to 5 years fast compared to some other tree crops. But and they start producing, when they do produce, you get substantial amounts. Like the first year, you're looking at 5 or 10 pounds. And the fruit goes for crazy prices sometimes, anywhere from $8 to $10 to $20 a pound. I've heard growers getting. So even in its first year, if it made 10 pounds of fruit, and you're selling it for 20 pounds, it's $200 off one very small tree. They grow almost like a shrub. We say tree, and you might think apple tree or maple tree or something, but they stay really small. For the most part, about 20 feet high, 20 feet wide. So about semi-dwarf apple tree size at maturity. You're talking 20 years from now, they get that big. They grow very gradually. It's recommended to keep them smaller. Kentucky State University has a lot of free information about pawpaws and videos, and publications, and they host tours of their pawpaw orchard. I frequented there many, many times. Just gave a talk there that was posted on KSU's YouTube channel a couple months ago in September. I gave a talk on pawpaws there, and so we have a good relationship. And they're a nice fruit for probably rural growers more than urban growers, where you're really confined for space, and you may not want to be dedicating 10 years to one place. But if you got a solid farm you're going to be at for a long time, pawpaws are a great option because the fruit is just so popular right now. And again, they have the native advantage of being very low maintenance. They don't really require any spraying. They don't require pruning, but it's helpful to restrict their height and to make sure they're not suckering everywhere. Or if you have a grafted tree, you have to keep all the limbs below the scion, where the graft union is. You have to keep all that clear below that. So they do require some maintenance, but I mean a tiny fraction of the problems and maintenance that's required of growing apples or peaches organically. They're really a no spray fruit. The fruit's delicious. It's really unique. It's kind of creamy. I think of it as kind of like a cross between like an avocado and a banana, with maybe a little bit of tropical fruit flavor in there. Maybe some are maybe slightly pineapple-y or slightly mango-ish or something. But they're pretty unique. You can't really say they taste like anything in particular. Maybe vanilla and banana are really common taste comparisons. But so they're fun. They're really fun. You have to have more than one for cross-pollination. They only need about 8 or 10 feet in between trees. So you can really pack a lot of them into a small space. I've got about some 150 of them packed into what's like a 20 foot by 150 foot space or something like that. I'm just sort of estimating right now, but I've got quite a few on a fairly small square footage. And yeah, all parts of the trees are valuable. The seeds, the twigs, the fruit, everything. The trees are in very high demand.
You were talking about packing them in. I always think about, they're an understory tree, and when you find them in the wild, they're pretty packed in there, and they're often like some of the most bountiful ones are right there on the edge of the forest, like under giant trees, but pretty dense areas. But the other thing is the fruit. Like once you get the fruit, what does the marketing look like? Because that's always the thing. How are people using them, and how are you selling them? Those, how would somebody sell them?
Sure. So they are, the majority of them are sold fresh, and that's where you really get the highest value. They range in size from about a quarter of a pound to about a pound. There are some reports of monstrous ones, 2 pounds, or and then you get really little ones too that might only be an ounce or two. But you don't want genetics like that. You want genetics that make nice big fruits. And so typically that means a grafted tree of a known variety, which is what we specialize in our nursery. And then we also sell what we call our ultra select line of pawpaw trees that are from very, very high quality genetics. I say some of the best pawpaw genetics in the world, which I'm very confident about that because we're in the heart of pawpaw country. And I've worked with KSU over the years to identify the very, very best genetics. And that's what we're working with. And so they actually do come fairly true to type from seed. And so not exactly the same, but they do tend to express the genetics of the parents pretty substantially. So, if you've got good seeds and you plant them, you're most likely going to get a good quality seedling, as long as the parent didn't cross-pollinate with something, totally crappy or anything. Then that would, kind of throw a monkey wrench into that. But ours are not like that. They're all open pollinated from very, very high quality trees. And so most of them are sold fresh. Like I said, for most uses, fresh harvesting the fruit from market, you're going to want grafted trees. So you know exactly what you're getting. And you can be assured you're going to get big fruit that's high quality. And basically, pawpaws drop from the ground when they're ripe, but you don't really want them to drop because then they get bruised. So you're really harvesting them one at a time, or a cluster at a time by hand, and then you're taking them to the market very carefully. And they're so popular, I'm sure people wouldn't even care if they were a little bruised. But you want to be really careful with them because they're really, really soft, very soft. And so you need to be treating them like glass, basically. And and so most of them are sold fresh for very high prices. Some people also sell large amounts to wineries, like wholesale, or some people are pulping them and selling frozen fruit pulp, which is pretty popular too. But, you have to have some infrastructure and it's, pretty time consuming. So really the best way to do it is to just cut them from the tree, pack them in boxes carefully, take them right to the market, and just watch them fly.
Well, Blake Cothron, this has been a super informative and fun conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome. It's been fun.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to check out some of Blake's books, like Pawpaws, The Complete Growing and Marketing Guide, as well as his forthcoming book, The Berry Grower, Small-Scale Organic Fruit Production in the 21st Century, out early summer of 2022. Some quick ways to support our work. You can swing over to no-tillgrowers.com and pick up a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook. Proceeds from that sale, specifically at no-tillgrowers.com, go to making you more free content. Venmo us a little bit to @no-tillgrowers, or PayPal to no-tillgrowers@gmail.com. All of that works too, and we super duper appreciate it. And of course, if you have not already, or maybe if you haven't in a long time, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. Thank you, however you find a way to support our work. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review, but this week all reviews must include a shout out to your favorite college basketball team. I'll start.
Go Cats!
Today's episode was brought to you in part by a grant from Southern SARE. Big thanks to Jackson Roulette for all his work, Josh Satin for his video guidance, Willie Breeding for the theme music, and of course my amazing wife, Hannah Crabtree. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
When you're running a podcast, do you find it difficult? Do you have to kind of hustle to find people to be on the show?
I used to. I don't anymore. I have a huge list.
You have a huge list.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't. When we started, I thought it would be like 5 people. Like I just was like, this is going to be so hard to find people within this niche. But I think one, the topics have expanded a lot, and two, the number of people doing it and the visibility of them has grown a lot. So it's kind of gone hand in hand that those two things have really blossomed. So I don't have trouble finding, guests. That's become much easier. Getting them nailed down can be a little tougher because everybody's so busy.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of why I just do the winters. I don't even bother with trying to do the summer.
Right.